The Oscars don't reward talent, they reward marketing. Sometimes they manage to do justice, as happened this year with Paul Thomas Anderson, but other times they star in genuine scandals that remind us of the Academy's true standards. Today, you are going to see some of the greatest performances of all time, most of which weren't even nominated. From extreme physical transformations to real accidents on set that ended in blood, these are the interpretations that didn't need an award to become eternal, but whose neglect remains an insult.
And the Oscar goes to Michael B. Jordan.
Look, I have absolutely nothing against Michael B. Jordan. On the contrary, he seems like a good guy. But what happened at this year's gala is a scandal that reminds us, point by point, why this video is necessary. With the monumental role of Leonardo DiCaprio, and above all, the transformation of Timothée Chalamet, it is incomprehensible that the award went elsewhere. You might like Chalamet or not, but his performance in Marty Supreme is something extraordinary. It's not just about playing a ping pong player, it's about capturing the sickening obsession, the arrogance, and the absolute fragility of a man who only exists to win. It is a physical and psychological interpretation that the Academy decided to ignore. Perhaps it's because Timothée has made some truly arrogant and stupid statements that caused everyone to jump on him. But the Oscars shouldn't be about marketing, they should be about art. And even if the actor has acted like a jerk at times and is the king of the modern ego, his role was the best of this year. What will remain for posterity is how the best actor of his generation gave his best performance in 2025. We'll see if he's capable of topping it. But I repeat, all my support to Michael B. Jordan. The fault isn't his, it's the Academy's. Imagine starring in Coppola's new film, playing the role of your life, carrying a masterpiece on your own for 3 hours, and not even getting an Oscar nomination. When people talk about Apocalypse Now, almost everyone remembers Marlon Brando or Robert Duvall. But the true heart of the film is Martin Sheen. While the Academy was nominating comfortable performances recorded in air-conditioned studios, Sheen was in the middle of a jungle in the Philippines, suffering a heart attack during filming and giving his all for a movie that seemed cursed. That opening scene in the Saigon Hotel, where we see him drunk, smashing a mirror with a punch and crying with his own blood. That's not makeup, and it's not a camera trick. It's a drunk man having a real breakdown in front of Coppola's lens. Martin Sheen is the emotional anchor that guides us through the horror, a contained and dark presence that carries the weight of an absolute masterpiece. The fact that Robert Duvall was nominated for 10 minutes of screen time, while Sheen, who sacrificed his health and nearly his life, was completely ignored, is one of the greatest offenses in Oscar history. Sometimes it seems the Academy rewards what looks difficult, but ignores what is authentically dangerous.
His old Ben.
Hey! Don't lay your palm flat on that tabletop!
There are performances that stand out within a great film. And then there is what Leonardo DiCaprio does in Django. Because although Tarantino's film is full of memorable characters, every time Cal Van Candy appears, the movie's temperature changes. Candy is one of the most repulsive villains in modern cinema. An educated, elegant, even charismatic man, but built upon absolute cruelty. DiCaprio plays him with a disturbing mix of sophistication, childishness, and sadism that makes him unpredictable and deeply unsettling. You never know when he's about to lose control. But the reason this is one of the most flagrant robberies in Oscar history is the famous dinner scene. While DiCaprio unleashes his hatred upon the table, he accidentally hits a glass cup and shatters his palm. What you see on screen isn't red paint or a special effect. It is DiCaprio's real blood staining the tablecloth and Kerry Washington's face. In that moment, any other actor would have yelled, "Cut!" But Leo didn't. He stayed in character, used the real pain to fuel his rage, and continued the scene with his hand wide open, bleeding over the other actors in a silence that chilled the blood of Tarantino's entire crew. It was a moment of absolute artistic possession. The Academy, in its infinite condescension, nominated and rewarded Christoph Waltz and forgot that DiCaprio had surrendered his own flesh for the film. They decided to ignore that art, sometimes, demands a price that cannot be paid with statuettes, but with scars.
Thank you for this friendly, friendly world. Thank you. And goodbye.
For years, Jim Carrey was pigeonholed as a purely comedic actor. But in Man on the Moon, Jim Carrey gave himself over until he lost his mind to play the most disturbing role of his entire history. To play the unclassifiable Andy Kaufman, Carrey didn't just study his gestures, he ceased to exist. Throughout the entire shoot, Jim Carrey disappeared and was possessed by the spirit of Kaufman and his alter ego, the insufferable Tony Clifton. He didn't break character even when the cameras were off. He harassed the director, sabotaged the sets, and pushed the technical crew to the brink of a nervous breakdown. What we see on screen is not an imitation. It is a transmigration of souls. Carrey committed to a level of artistic schizophrenia rarely seen in cinema history, blurring the line between genius and madness. He won the Golden Globe, convinced the critics, and gave us the most complex and disturbing performance of his career. But what did the Academy do? They didn't even nominate him. And it's not the exception. Jim Carrey has never been nominated for a single Oscar. An actor who not only dominated comedy, but demonstrated an acting range superior to 99% of dramatic actors. I have a video on my channel where I talk about the actor's psychological consequences after this role. I recommend you check it out. There, you'll discover his mastery and dedication, and the infinite myopia of the Academy.
Nothing is normal or natural or everything is a game.
In Phantom Thread, all the attention seemed destined for Daniel Day-Lewis. It was his last film, his farewell. And yet, there is someone who holds him, challenges him, and in many moments surpasses him without making a sound. Vicky Krieps. The Oscar narrative was already written. The method giant was saying goodbye with a Paul Thomas Anderson masterpiece. But what the Academy didn't want to see, or didn't know how to process, is that the true strength of the film, the anchor holding every frame, was a virtually unknown Luxembourgish actress. Her performance as Alma is an exercise in silent poison, a contained force that ends up breaking the genius. While Daniel Day-Lewis deployed all his usual method technique, Krieps responded with a naturalness and a gaze that gave you chills. The film is a duel to the death, and she wins every round. The result? The Academy nominated Paul Thomas Anderson, nominated the film, nominated the costume design, nominated a supporting actress from the film, and of course, nominated Day-Lewis. Her? They erased her from the map. It was an act of intellectual blindness. They ignored a performance that didn't need to scream to be devastating, a woman who achieved the impossible, eclipsing the sun without getting burned.
This is me, all right? I'm not a fucking athlete. This is my fucking way. This is how I win.
What Adam Sandler did in Uncut Gems is a 2-hour anxiety attack turned into cinema. It is the perfect example of how the Academy's prejudice can become ridiculous. For decades, Sandler has been the silly comedy guy, the actor Hollywood looked down upon while he filled the studio's coffers. But in 2019, under the direction of the Safdie brothers, Sandler didn't just prove he could act. He proved he could devour the screen with a manic energy that few actors in history have managed to sustain. Howard Ratner is not a likable character. He is an adrenaline addict, a guy walking on the edge of a cliff who drags you down with him. Sandler gave us a physical, sweaty, and desperate performance. He made us empathize with a man who makes one stupid decision after another, keeping us glued to the seat with our hearts in our throats. But the Oscars' response was absolute emptiness. Not even a nomination. The Academy preferred to ignore the most risky and electric work of the year, simply because it came from the guy who made Jack and Jill. It's hard to swallow, but we have to say it. The Academy has a pathological problem with Jim Carrey. If they were afraid of him with Andy Kaufman, they were envious of him with Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. In 2004, Carrey stripped himself emotionally to play Joel Barish, a broken, grey, and desperately lonely man who decides to erase the woman he loves from his memory. Forget the funny faces, forget the physical comedy. What we see here is a scared man navigating the rubble of his own memories. Carey gave us a performance of such restraint and tenderness that it breaks your heart in every frame. It is the definitive portrait of male vulnerability in the 21st century. And while his co-star, the immense Kate Winslet, did receive her well-deserved nomination, the Academy decided, once again, to leave Jim Carrey at the door of the gala. It was the cruelest robbery of the decade. They rewarded original screenplays and brilliant concepts, but ignored the man who gave a face to that pain. They punished Carrey for being too famous or too funny in the past, proving that in Hollywood, forgiveness doesn't exist for those coming from comedy. They left out one of the most honest, sad, and perfect performances in the history of romantic cinema solely due to pure, stupid prejudice. It is the example that the Oscars prefer a stiff period drama over an emotional truth that burns you from the inside.
I used to talk to you all the time, even though I was alone. I walked around for months talking to you.
I will defend this performance and this film until the day I die. Nastassja Kinski in Paris, Texas delivers possibly the most authentic, pure, vulnerable, and transcendental performance in cinema history. Winner of the Palme d'Or at Cannes and being the best film of the 80s, the Oscars decided not to give it a single nomination. Kinski plays Jane, a woman who is little more than a ghost, a painful memory thumping in the desert until she finally appears behind the glass of a peep show. That final scene, that monologue through the phone where we only see her gaze and her pink sweater, is one of the pinnacles of modern acting. Kinski doesn't need grand gestures. The movement of her eyes is enough to transmit a whole life of pain, of having known the love of your life and being unable to live with him. It is a performance of such purity and fragility that it leaves you breathless. But of course, for the 1984 Academy, a slow and deep European auteur film was too strange. They preferred to reward bombastic biographies and safe period dramas rather than recognize that a German actress had just captured the wounded soul of America better than anyone. Ignoring Nastassja Kinski was proof that the Oscars are terrified of subtlety, terrified of silence, and terrified of actresses who don't need to scream and cry to break your soul. If this performance isn't in the top spot, it's because the Oscars certainly tend to completely ignore foreign auteur performances. Therefore, it's less surprising. But if it's about acting quality, this performance takes the gold medal.
Yeah. Oh, Jerry, I love this guy.
In 2019, the whole world stood up to applaud Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, but almost no one remembers that this film is basically a remake of the masterpiece Robert De Niro and Scorsese birthed decades earlier, and which the Academy despicably snubbed. What De Niro did in The King of Comedy is possibly his most difficult and brilliant work. De Niro plays Rupert Pupkin, a mediocre man with no talent but a sickening obsession with fame that leads him to kidnap his idol to get his 15 minutes of glory. In 1982, the Oscars didn't know what to do with this film. They were used to the explosive and violent De Niro. They weren't prepared for this psychopath with a practiced smile and polite manners who represents the absolute void of the modern soul. Pupkin isn't a comic book villain. He is the direct ancestor of today's desperate influencers, of the streamers who would do anything for a like, and of the spectacle culture that prefers to be somebody for a day, then nobody forever. De Niro's performance is an exercise in terrifying pathos. He is capable of making you feel second-hand embarrassment and fear at the same time, moving on a line so thin it becomes unbearable to watch. But of course, the Oscars of that year preferred to reward much more heroic and complacent performances. They ignored the fact that De Niro had just portrayed the future of our society with surgical precision.
Your discretion is advised. Here's what we know.
We've reached number 1, and it hurts because it is the exact reflection of the rot I denounced at the beginning. In 2014, Jake Gyllenhaal delivered the most terrifying, lucid, and prophetic performance of the 21st century in Nightcrawler. To bring Lou Bloom to life, Gyllenhaal didn't just lose 10 kilograms until he was left with a cadaverous face and unblinking insect eyes. He emptied himself inside to become a sociopath, tailor-made for our digital age. Lou Bloom is the algorithm personified, a ruthless guy who discovers that blood, chaos, and the tragedy of others are the best export products. Gyllenhaal gave us a nocturnal predator who manipulates crime scenes so the framing is more spectacular. A man who has replaced empathy with ratings. It is a performance that is magnetic and repulsive at the same time, leaving you with a feeling of filth on your skin because you know, deep down, that Lou Bloom is the people every time they feed the morbid curiosity on social media. And yet, he wasn't even nominated. The neglect of Nightcrawler is the #1 spot because it proves the Oscars don't have the courage to reward genius when it is too uncomfortable. Gyllenhaal didn't need a statuette to go down in history, but his absence is the final proof that the awards are just a cardboard stage set. Real cinema, the kind that burns you and changes you from within, always happens outside their galas. In the end, the Oscars are just an industry rewarding itself for not making anyone uncomfortable. But real cinema, the kind that freezes your blood like Gyllenhaal or breaks your soul like Kinski, doesn't need validation from men in air-conditioned offices. Real talent is dangerous, it's dirty, and it's honest. Don't look for the truth in a golden statuette. Look for it in the works Hollywood tried to ignore. Subscribe, reclaim your judgment, and above all, stop being a passive spectator of your own life. Turn off the screen and live.